We had a great chance to tour and look at some of the critical work that's been done over the last couple of years, showing the governor some of the things that he asked us to do on day one of his administration, and we have accomplished those and continue to have more work to do. But we were able to take a look at that and see what progress has been made thus far. So with that, I think we're going to hear a bit more about specific items in furthering that work that are in the proposed budget, as well as firefighting capacity. And with that, I will ask Governor for you to come on up and tell us how it is.
Thanks, Chief, and it's good to be here with Chief Porter as well as Mark Gilladucci, the head of the Office of Emergency Services. I appreciate all the men and women of CAL FIRE that are here, and to other folks in uniform. We're grateful to their leadership and stewardship. We did have an opportunity, as Chief Porter said, to fly over some of those early action projects that we advanced a couple years back. One of the first actions I took as governor, quite literally the first week after I was sworn in as governor, was an emergency authorization to allow us to fast-track 35 high-profile fuels management projects here in the state of California. The purpose was to expedite the delivery time to the fuels management strategies. What would have taken 5 to 10 years in some cases, we were able to get done in 5 to 10 months. In fact, all 35 projects were completed in about a year. One lagged a little bit down in Santa Cruz, but ultimately was done a few months later. We now have 500 projects we've identified, not those 35 high-profile projects, 500 fuels management projects all throughout the state of California, aided by an effort we call CalVIP, which allowed the state of California to do a programmatic EIR of some 20 million acres that allowed us to fast-track the environmental reviews that will move those projects, again, over the course of the next few years as opposed to the course of a decade plus. It shows the urgency of the moment, shows the urgency of our efforts as we once again prepare for wildfire season here in the state of California. None of us are naive about the challenges that this state faces. For that matter, the entire western United States. You've seen some of the news, I'm sure, as it relates to the record drought conditions that persist all throughout the western United States, either extreme or severe drought. You saw record wildfires, not just here in the state of California last year, over 4 million acres burned here in this state, but you saw some record wildfires in Colorado, Washington, Oregon struggled as well. All of us mindful of the nature of Mother Nature. The hots, as I say often, are getting hotter, the dries are getting a lot drier, and with these atmospheric rivers, we're seeing the wets get a lot wetter. The fundamental plumbing, the architecture of which we've come to know around hydrology has radically changed, and you're seeing that in record-breaking this, record-breaking that on a consistent basis. No longer is it anomalous. What is anomalous is having consistency in terms of normality with records. You may recall the records we broke last year. Last August, we had 12,000 lightning strikes that occurred over a 24-hour period, leading to 560 large-scale wildfires, including the one we just went over, the Jones Fire, not too far away. Those lightning strikes led to a record amount of stress on our mutual aid system that was benefited not only locally in terms of state support that was received at the local level or local support that gained state support, but federally our mutual aid system was stretched. Mindful of that and the record heat dome that we experienced last August and the fact that we have had so many record-breaking years and months over the course of the last decades, clearly we recognize we need to step up our efforts here in the state of California. And that's what we began to do early this year. And I want to thank the California legislature, the state senate, and the assembly leaders for an early action effort where we were able to draw down $536 million against a $1 billion proposal on forest and fuels management here in the state. We recognize that was a down payment on that $1 billion budget, but today we're announcing that $1 billion budget is now $2 billion. We are doubling our historic wildfire budget from the $1 billion we proposed in January to now a $2 billion proposal that was submitted to the legislature just last week. That $2 billion will allow us to build on the $536 million of early action with an additional $708 million for our fuels management efforts in the state. Total, if you're got to stay close to all this, we'll provide all the information, but it's a little over $1.2 billion, $1.24 billion to be exact, just in our fire break, fuels management, forest health budget. In addition to that, roughly $800 million more in our all hazards emergency preparedness efforts in the state of California. Again, a $2 billion record-breaking investment in preparing for wildfire season, and then looking medium and long term at addressing the deficit in terms of our efforts on forest health, forest management, fuels management, as well as fire breaks all up and down the state of California. One of the things that didn't get as much attention, that was not part of the early action but was additive on the basis of an emergency appropriation, was an $80.74 million additional investment to secure 1,399 firefighters. So $80 million, roughly 1,400 new firefighters seasonally that will be added to our permanent crews in the state. Also includes hand crews, not just wildfire personnel through the CAL FIRE logo, but we have now the ability to do more with more boots on the ground, to do more as well with more of the equipment we flew in on. And I should note, important to look around, you see a number of C-130s. A few years ago, these things didn't exist. The state of California has now procured 7 of these C-130s. 3 you see in front of you and behind all of you with the CAL FIRE logo. These are still being converted fully. The rest of the fleet comes in, I think, Chief, at the latest 2023. All of those C-130s will now be under the CAL FIRE logo. This, in addition to the helicopter we flew in today, we just got another one last week. We will have 12 of these new helicopters in our fleet by the end of next year. We have a number coming in at the end of this year. The significance of the helicopter we flew in on is these replace the old 1970s Huey helicopters. These are state-of-the-art, what we call Fire Hawks, otherwise known in more traditional terms as Black Hawk helicopters. These fly much faster, they allow for more suppression, and they're a lot more safe, which is significant for our CAL FIRE brothers and sisters and their safety. So these are an important part of our civil aerial firefighting fleet, which is the largest in the world. CAL FIRE has the largest civil aerial firefighting technology and fleet anywhere on the planet. And so we're just building on that status, continue to invest a historic amount of money. Again, boots on the ground, forest management, fuels breaks, as well as new technologies, including the technology, this state-of-the-art helicopter we flew in on. LiDAR, remote sensoring, more fire cameras, ability to access Pentagon technology, more traditional mechanisms for predicting fires, as well as modeling forest fires, all part and parcel of the budget that we're enhancing this year. We're also looking to build out the equivalent of the National Hurricane Center here for the state of California. That's also part of our May revised budget. This will allow us a center to bring all of our emergency personnel and key players under one roof, aided by the advancements in all of the new weather stations and weather monitoring that now we have in our portfolio. So with that, we just wanted to update you with all of that information and recognize with all of that, good enough never is. And all of us need to be mindful as we enter in the wildfire seasons, the importance of home hardening, the importance of defensible spaces, If you have not cleaned out the front yard, your backyard, and looking at defensible space, I want to remind everybody of the imperative to do just that. I want to remind everybody that we also will be providing tens of millions of dollars in grants for home hardening, and we look forward to working with the legislature to get that final appropriation through and onto my desk over the course of the next few weeks. And finally, I just want to remind everybody our all-hazard approach includes earthquakes. And I say this mindful that I'm fourth-generation San Franciscan as a former mayor of San Francisco, but you don't need to be reminded, just being up here, some of our kids were woken up. We were still awake, 9:30 at night, feeling the effects of an earthquake up near Truckee. No part of this state immune from Mother's Nature fury, not just as it relates to the impacts of more acute wildfires, but of earthquakes. $17 million is also in this budget for earthquake early warning system, which is now fully operational up and down the state. I encourage people to download the apps on the early earthquake warning technology, take advantage of the state-of-the-art technology, and again, be prepared in terms of your emergency preparedness. Again, not just for wildfires and earthquakes, but all types of emergencies. One of the beauties being in California is there's a reason it's so spectacular, so beautiful, and that is the historic nature from time immemorial of Mother Nature's impact on our quality of life. And so it is part of being a citizen of this state, do our best individually to be prepared, as the state of California does more than ever to be prepared for this year's upcoming wildfire season. So that's what we want to communicate with all of you. $2 billion historic investment. Looking forward to working with the legislature to get the remaining dollars out into the field, supporting our mutual aid, local grant programs, and other efforts all across the state of California as we enter in a wildfire season that already promises to be active. These are the final words. As we were flying down, Chief Porter reminded me over 1,000 plus more fires this year than this time last year. And last year was a record-breaking year. 1,000 plus more this year than last year. And last year was a record-breaking year. You're already feeling the temperature shifts. You already saw those red flag warnings, which are earlier in May than we've seen in many, many years because of the winds that are coming earlier. So let us all be mindful and let us all be prepared as we move in to this season's challenging portion of the season and the peak of fire season. With that, happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Governor. Emily Maha with KCRA. 2 questions. The first one, what's your reaction to environmentalists who say California is too aggressive in putting out wildfires and should allow those fuels to burn? My second question, your message to the communities affected by wildfires. Santa Rosa, where many are still not seeing payouts, compensation, Paradise that's still rebuilding. What's your message to those communities?
Well, really proud of the resilience of Paradise. I've been back on multiple occasions. We have been very mindful of the needs of Paradise, and we've been doing things that in the past the state has not done to secure confidence in property tax and secure confidence that the state will be there not just episodically but over the long run for the rebuilding. Because of the incredible work of Mark Ghilarducci and others, we were able to prepare in a much faster period of time than was anticipated the sites for rebuilding. We're seeing new permits, people move back into Paradise, and doing so with resiliency front and center, and making sure that we're rebuilding in a much safer way because of that tragedy. As it relates to issues in and around Santa Rosa, Napa, Sonoma counties, mindful of what's happened over the course of the last many, many years with record fires seasons, doing more in terms of the high priority fuels breaks and forest management in and around those communities, working with our mutual aid system to provide record investment in local grants, resiliency grants, as well as support for efforts to mitigate the impacts of PSPS as it relates to the upcoming fire season. You may have been implying some of the frustrations people are experiencing because of the bankruptcy courts and with the lawyers and the agreements that were made as it relates to payouts. All I can say is the courts and the lawyers have a unique responsibility to make those payouts. The state doesn't oversee that. That was done by the bankruptcy court. Was done as part of the settlement agreement, but I've been reading, as others have, about the fact that those payments have been slow, and all I can say is speed them up, get moving. It's wrong to leave these victims any more victimized than they already have been by these wildfires, particularly the culpability that is PG&E. I should note, as it relates to the IOUs, the investor-owned utilities, we have a new wildfire safety division that was set up under SB 350, which was the legislation we signed in order to get PG&E out of bankruptcy and secure the other two large IOUs and others up and down the state of California. That Wild Safety Division, in addition to a brand new board of directors at PG&E, in addition to new executive leadership at PG&E, we're holding them higher level of accountability and transparency than we ever have in the past, and also mindful of their need to do more undergrounding their system and modernizing their system, as well as continuing to do more to decentralize their system so we can de-energize certain sectors of that system without impacting millions of others outside those direct sectors. So all of that part and parcel of a stacking of responsibilities and support that are underway and have been undertaken in this state.
Questions. Nicole Nixon with CAP Radio News. It looks like there's $50 million for prescribed burns in your proposed budget. How much of a role do you envision prescribed burns playing in the state's fire mitigation strategy? Should it be larger? Is that something you need to work up to? And also, do you have any funding for public education on the differences between smoke from prescribed burns versus the smoke from wildfires, which is obviously not controlled and much more dangerous?
I'll let Chief Porter know there's notification requirements. There are very strong environmental requirements relates to prescribed burns and more broadly our general forest management and fuel breaks efforts. That said, we are putting a historic amount of money into that space. I can't make up for the last 100 years. You can make up, I've been in 28 months and we're doing more in that space than we ever have, but prescribed burns are a big part of our strategy. It's an and strategy, not an or strategy. Some people say just focus on forest health, prescribed burns, and forest management. We believe you need to do that and do more pre-positioning assets, more with technology, more with supports for mutual aids and grants to cities and counties all up and down the state of California. So with that, let me turn to Tom Porter. We could talk more about some of the notification around those distinctions in terms of public education, but I will note that the public education component broadly in terms of investments, PSAs, and support for local notification and PSAs that are localized, not just state, is also at record levels with the budget that we just submitted to the legislature and portions of the budget that were approved as part of that early action. But Chief Porter, talk more about the permits.
Well, thank you, Governor. Thank you for the question as well. When it comes to prescribed fire, we wholly know that we need to do more burning under our terms in this state to reduce the amount of fuels in the kind of native vegetation areas, but also in areas that have invasives. It is our best and most cost-effective tool for doing just that. The caveat is not every piece of California is ready for prescribed fire yet. There are a lot of areas that are overgrown, a lot of areas where it's not safe to put fire on the ground under any circumstances, and that's why firefighting will continue to be a very, very important mechanism in our landscape, regardless of whether we're doing prescribed burning or not. But the education piece, every Californian needs to know that smoke is a natural part of California's landscape and air mass. And while we're reducing emissions in other areas, in the area of emissions caused by prescribed fire, we're going to have to find a place where we understand the need and the value of that emission source. So smoke is an issue. Yes, we have plans to reduce its impacts. We don't burn in areas where that are target areas for specific smoke impacts, hospitals, those kind of things. But we need to do more, and we need to do it over a long period of time. So as we build into this process, we need to do more mechanical and fuels management with animals and crews. And then once we have safe areas to burn, we will reintroduce fire, and that will be the primary tool in the future. But I'm talking about decades out. I'm not talking about today, tomorrow. We have to build that over an incremental basis over the next many, many years to get to the right place and the right combination. Thank you.
Just because you can't say this enough, this is all about partnerships, not just with local government, notably with the federal government. I want to remind everybody, close to 60% of the forested land in the state of California is managed by the federal government. Very small percentage, just a few percent, is owned by the state of California. And that's why we were pleased a year plus ago to do a memorandum of understanding with the U.S. Forest Service to double the forest management, the active forest management, in terms of our respective roles and responsibilities. The state has been supplementing those federal efforts, but now with an administration that is less close-fist, now more of an open hand, we expect significant investments by the U.S. Forest Service to advance these efforts. It goes to the previous question as well, as it relates to not necessarily environmental concerns around not letting fires continue. Quite the contrary, more of a suppression framework with the environmental community. But the Forest Service has one approach, and the state has often, to be fair, a little bit different approach in terms of fire suppression. And this has been manifest, that August complex versus some of the other fires you've seen in the state of California. I don't know if, Chief, you want to just briefly pick up on that, or Mark, on some of those considerations and some of those efforts.
And related to the way we're working with the Forest Service and also complementing each other, there's a couple of things. Federal land managers can make decisions on federal lands that we can't make on private land. So managed fire is something that can be done on federal lands through that kind of a process. They can have a prescription, they can have an area that they expect for fire to continue to burn, and they can manage fire. As the state's fire chief on the SRA and state's forester, I don't have the authority to make a decision to allow private land to burn proactively without an agreement and CEQA in place. So what we're doing to balance this is we're looking to a future where we have large landowners who have prescriptions that they have allowed us to develop on their behalf that will give us opportunities to maybe allow fire to burn more of a landscape than we normally would under today's perspective. But again, with the private property rights that are out there, that is a true issue that we have in California on private lands. We cannot just make decisions to allow landowners' lands to burn because we don't know if that fits into their management strategy and their rights.
Hi, Governor. Sophia Bolag here from the Sacramento Bee. Last week, a Democratic state senator suggested that he's hoping the recall election will be scheduled as soon as possible. I'm wondering, do you agree with him, and when do you hope that election will be scheduled?
Well, that's going to be determined by a series of actions the legislature takes, Department of Finance takes, Secretary of State takes, and they'll make that determination, period, full stop. I think this Republican-backed recall, I'm going to work hard to defeat it, focus on the things that people care about most, and that's more vaccines, people's arms, and getting this economy moving again. I should note those economic numbers that came out last week were extraordinary. It's remarkable, just in the last 3 months, the state of California has been privileged to create just shy of 400,000 new jobs. 38% of all the jobs in America came out of the state of California in the latest jobs numbers. When we talk about California roaring back, that's what we're pointing to. We are also very mindful of the importance of getting ahead of this active wildfire season, continue to do more to help small businesses all up and down the state get back on their feet, and then prepare all our kids back in-person instruction this fall, which we are absolutely confident we can get done. And then I think most importantly, folks out there are looking forward to moving beyond this blueprint, June 15th. And today we had a record low in our positivity rate, 0.8%. Our case rate, positivity rates have consistently been among the lowest, if not the lowest, in the United States of America. And we're mindful we still have work to do, but very proud of the work of 40 million Californians strong. Again, as it relates to terminations about calendars, I'll leave that to others.
Hi, Governor Zavala with Nexstar Media Group. You mentioned the positivity rate just now. I'm wondering what evacuation centers are going to look like this year, just with those who are vaccinated versus those who are not. Will we have some of the similar protocols in place as we did last year? Yeah.
No. June 15th, in just a number of weeks, we're moving beyond the blueprint, which means, with the exception of very large-scale indoor events, very large-scale, 5,000+ individuals, that we are removing all of those protocols that we've become accustomed to over the course of the last year plus. That said, we learned a lot from those protocols in terms of emergency response from last year, but you will not see those same restrictions and that same criteria this year that you saw last year, on the basis of the blueprint being no longer modified, but the blueprint being removed in the state.
And this question is really for Chief Porter. Just how are your resources, your personnel doing under these conditions that I know are more extreme than what we saw at this time last year, and also with the emergency funds that were on more firefighters? All those spots been filled?
So related to firefighters and firefighting resources. CAL FIRE, we did receive through early action, and thank you, Governor, for approving that to move forward, 1,399, almost 1,400 additional firefighters. So that was early. They are still on. They will continue to be with us through the peak of season. So firefighters on the ground, we actually have more firefighters on the ground going into peak season than we ever have before. And so what that means is we're diversifying our crews. And so our crews, while we've seen a reduction in inmates available for our fire crew program, we've increased the number of seasonal firefighters to fill that need. So that's happening. On the hiring front, we have had no problem hiring all of the firefighters that we need for this season, and we're working with our federal counterparts to ensure that they're getting the fills in their critical positions that they need filled as well. So we work on this together across the board to make sure we're staffed in California.
Hi, Governor. Thank you for taking my question. Renee Santos with CBS 13. I have 3 questions here. The first one is, how much is of this effort, if any, is in response to the grounding of the super tanker? Second question, in addition, when can we start seeing hiring happening sooner in the year so that staffing is already ramped up by late April, May? Lastly, of the roughly 1,400 added firefighters, what percentage will be our dedicated hand crews?
So first, on Global Supertanker. Global Supertanker is one resource of hundreds of different options that we have for wildland firefighting from aerial platforms. It is the largest, for sure. It is a tool that has a specific kind of area that it works in. We have our 23 S2T air tankers that are our bread and butter. They are the air tanker of choice for CAL FIRE because they can get into tight places where these very large air tankers can't, and can be very effective during initial attack. as fires get bigger, we have all of the rest of the resources that are capable of dropping retardant that are at our fingertips with our Forest Service and our Call One Needed contracts. So while Global Supertanker is not, and the company has chosen not to continue this year, it's just one resource. It's not the definitive resource for large air tankers or very large air tankers. We still have access to 3 DC-10s and other large air tankers. On the resources are going to continue. We're just now hitting peak season in the south. What that means is every single fire engine will be staffed. All of the firefighters will be hired. That is happening on Monday in the south part of the state, and then it will happen progressively into the north part of the state. And we will have all of the resources, all of the boots on the ground, as I often say, to be available to fight fire. But we also started early. So we have a lot more boots on the ground and ability to fight fire now than we did last year at this time. That is going to continue. A lot of those resources continue all the way through into the fall and into the winter. And then we will move into hopefully a fall season that isn't as damaging as we had last year. It will just depend on what the weather and Mother Nature give to us.
Anybody else? Thank you. And I also should note, we also made some changes at CDCR as it relates to hand crews and the ability for some of the efforts to be supplemented on the basis of the scarcity that we had last year. And just want to point to that. It's also part of our early action. I want to just thank everybody for their focus and attention to this critical issue, wildfire safety across the spectrum, mindful as we enter into now the second year of a drought, these drought conditions and the acuity that places additional stress and strain across the spectrum. But this state is up to the task. We are resilient. We have remarkable grit and capacity, and now with historic investments, we'll have more resources as well than any time in California's recent history. With that, I want to just thank Chief Porter, his entire team. I want to thank Mark Illardici and his entire team, household names and faces around this time of year. We certainly look forward to updating you on a consistent basis. And again, want to remind each and every person watching at home the importance of your own personal decisions as it relates to being prepared, an all hazards approach to emergencies of all type, and doing what you can to fortify your homes by just using common sense and defensible spaces. And to the extent you're adequately resourced or looking to get resources from the state, to look at upgrading your space through home hardening techniques that have proven, even in paradise, to not only save lives but also save property. Thank you all very much.